Hello, my name's Samson Stroke. I'm the Food Systems Specialist for Groundwork Milwaukee, and thank you for joining me virtually for Growing Herbs Indoors, a workshop by Groundwork Milwaukee. To give you some background in this work, I've been with Groundwork for about 2 years, and I have been growing and farming for about 5 years. I kept indoor herbs on my windowsill last winter, and I'm excited to share some tips and tricks with you. Today, for some background, we'll be talking about taking care of your herbs in windowsills, some main factors to consider, including potentially using artificial light. And then, after giving a demonstration on how you can repot your herb, we'll talk about some more specifics on harvesting your herbs, drying them, and bringing your pots outside for summer if you choose to do so. So let's get into it. There are 4 main factors we're going to consider for indoor growing. Our first is our containers or our pots. Second is our growing medium, so our potting soil and any fertilizer. Our third is, of course, water and humidity. Plants sort of need that to grow. And then last is going to be light. So let's talk about pots and containers. Your options available are plastic pots or a terracotta ceramic pot. The benefit of a plastic pot is it's less expensive and should be fine to last you a season or even a year or so. The benefit of our terracotta or ceramic pot is it is more heavy duty. The downside is a little bit more breakable, but the breathable texture material of the ceramic will allow for better soil regulation. If you're just starting off with indoor growing, I would suggest starting with plastic pots, and as your herbs get bigger and need to be repotted, if you determine this is a hobby that you like, then maybe it's time to switch up to ceramic. Our next factor to consider is our growing medium and our potting mix. When I'm talking to more novice gardeners, folks sometimes ask me, well, can't I just scoop some dirt from my backyard? Which is an understandable thought. Dirt sort of looks like dirt. But there's a lot of smaller factors to consider in terms of what the best growing medium is going to be for us. The reason why I would recommend using a bought potting mix instead of what's from your backyard is the soil from your backyard, living here in Milwaukee, is generally going to be contaminated and possibly have toxins in it, just from the fact that it's outside here in an urban center. My easiest example of this is lead paint on houses, chipping off, entering the soil system, and then having lead in the soil. Also, working with our herbs, we're working with pretty tender seedlings. They're like little babies to this world, and have a harder time dealing with any potential pathogens that might be in the soil. So giving them this sort of luxury Cadillac growing mix is going to be the best and easiest for them. Whatever potting mix you find at your garden center so should be just fine, and on the back of it or somewhere on the bag should be some really easy instructions on how much to use and what nutrients or the exact makeup of your mix might be. Our other factor to consider with our growing media is if we want to add any type of fertilizer. So with our herbs growing indoors in the winter, they're at a pretty natural disadvantage. They're not having their ideal temperature and probably not their ideal exposure to sunlight. And so helping them grow by having a very nutritious soil with the use of fertilizer can be pretty helpful. It's also not necessary if it doesn't interest you very much. In your take-home kit, you will receive a little bottle of vermicompost. Vermicompost is a big box of worms, specifically red wigglers, breaking down organic matter and turning it into some delicious super fertilizer, which is this worm juice. The instructions are on your bottle, but the best way to use this is to mix 2 tablespoons with a liter of water and then use that throughout the next week or 2 of fertilizing and watering your plant. You should let that solution sit for about a day to really let the nutrients become available to the plant in a water-soluble way. Our third factor to consider naturally, since we have our container filled with our growing medium and with our herb right in it, is water. How often do I need to water my plant to keep it healthy and growing strong? In winter, our main consideration is the dryness of the season. If you can imagine your body needing more lotion in the winter, our plant needs a little bit more humidity than the atmosphere is naturally providing. To do this, in your kit, you do have a little spray bottle to lightly mist your plant. Maybe once every other day should be sufficient. To increase humidity with your plants is, instead of using separate pots, to have more of a trough in which you have multiple herbs right next to each other. Just that proximity will create a bit of a microclimate where the humidity of plants are affecting each other and in general just increasing moisture for the whole system. In addition to regularly misting or spritzing your plants, a good watering schedule can be about twice a week. If you haven't had indoor plants before, learning how to water them intuitively is a process. But if you're not killing plants, you're not growing plants. A good way to see if your plants need to be watered or not is just to take your finger and stick it into the soil medium itself. And if you feel dryness past that second knuckle, it's a great indication that it's dry and you're going to want more water. Don't be too intimidated when it comes to watering your plants. Use that sensory feedback, touch the soil, watch the plant, and after a few weeks you should get a pretty intuitive understanding of how damp the soil needs to be. Signs that a plant is being underwatered, of course, is crispiness and wiltiness. Some indications that your plant needs water is, of course, seeing wiltiness or crispiness on the end of the leaves, like it's drying up, and also feeling the soil itself. If it feels dry to the touch, past that second knuckle, when you put your finger in, that's a great indication that there isn't enough moisture or water for the plant. As provided as part of your kit, should be some sort of saucer under your pot. If you don't have a proper saucer, most of my house just has plastic plates under it. But it's good to have something underneath to collect that water as it runs through, as it will most likely pool when your first few times of pouring water. So for a quick recap, we've talked about the type of pot or container you might want to use, what sort of potting soil and fertilization recommendations, and of course watering your plant. The biggest factor to consider here is light. In the winter and growing inside, your plant is going to receive a lot less light than it naturally would in the summer seasons. So what are our possible issues to troubleshoot with, and what are some of our solutions for that troubleshooting? In general, you're wanting to put your plant in a place that has the most light exposure. The Cadillac, the best possible space for your herb, is going to be in a southern facing window. That just naturally receives the most sunlight throughout the day. If you don't have a southern facing window, western window is your next bet. My suggestion with light is to set up your plant where you can, where you want it to be. And if things are going good, keep it that way. If things are not looking so good, then you might want to consider using some artificial light. Your plant will show signs of not having enough light if it starts to grow leggy, starts to grow a very long stem as if it is searching for light, and if it starts sort of leaning in the direction of the light, trying to absorb as much of it as you possibly can. If you see that start to happen, especially if there's some yellowness or wilting with it, that's a great indication. You might want to find a space in your house that has more light exposure or start supplementing with artificial light. When we're talking about artificial light, we have a lot of opportunities to choose from. Light itself is a spectrum of color, and the two types of color that our plants really like are red light and blue light. Blue light is what encourages chlorophyll production. When you think chlorophyll, you might be thinking about the color green. That's a good way to think about it. Since we're growing herbs, which are very green and leafy, we want a lot of blue light. Red light, on the other hand, encourages blooming and flower production. Ideally, we sort of want an equal mix between these, but if you have the opportunity to choose something that's a little more blue leaning than red leaning, is preferable, lightly. There are 4 types of light that we can choose from, sort of 4 sources. We'll talk about 3, and I'll really recommend one. So our first is just incandescent light. That's sort of a normal light bulb that you would get from just about anywhere. Incandescent light bulbs are our least expensive option. They also are not particularly energy efficient, and they give off a lot of heat. So if you're using a regular bulb for your plants, you want to keep that at like a 8 to 10 foot distance from them, and at that point you're losing a lot of the light that's supposed to be helping your plant. But it is the least expensive option. Our next option is fluorescent light. You might think about those long tubes that you see in like a school or like your workplace. We're under fluorescent lights right now. Fluorescent lights are much more energy efficient than incandescent. They're 2.5 times more efficient, but they are more expensive, and in trying to find easy options for folks to buy themselves, I was having a hard time finding things in bulb form rather than in tube form themselves. The benefit of fluorescent light is it's more energy efficient. There are more lights particularly made for growing, so they have that balanced spectrum of red to blue light, and they also give off less heat than our incandescent lights. If you're starting to search for grow lights online or in stores, you might come across our third source of light, which is our high intensity discharge lights. Now these lights tend to be really the powerhouse of grow lights. They're made to grow plants, so that perfect balance between red and blue light. They also tend to be expensive, bulky, and made for more commercial or intense operations. So what I would suggest for folks is our fourth source of light, which are LEDs, or light emitting diodes. LED lights can be customized to produce different wavelengths of lights, and thus it's an excellent option to find something that's marketed as a grow light that will have that combination of red and blue that you're looking for in a bulb that is very energy efficient and long lasting. Generally, our plants want anywhere from 12 to 18 hours of light. More toward that 18 hours if the plant isn't receiving sort of any supplemental light. But if it is in a windowsill, more towards 12 hours of light. Once again, the best way to sort of navigate both watering and light and any of these factors is just to experience it. Set things up, see if it's going well, and just start responding when the plant looks like it needs some extra support. If you're not killing plants, you're not growing plants. Also in your take-home packet, in addition to your herb seedlings, we've provided simple seeds. So you probably have one or two or all or none of the seeds provided here. If you've never planted a seed before, the excellent thing is that there should be pretty specific instructions on the back of your packet. When you're using a seed packet, you should always check the back to see what tips and tricks it has. It'll tell you what zone that this plant works best in, how long you should wait before you'll start seeing the seedling germinate. Just useful information like that. Generally, for any seed, we want to plant it as deep as the diameter of the seed, which is going to be pretty small. You can fill whatever container you have just about to the absolute brim. With most potting mixes, I'll also pat it down to really make sure I'm getting everything I need. We're gonna go with cilantro, one of my favorite herbs. As a pro tip, to secure your whole packet, it's nice to have a paper clip to secure it, or a rubber band. And you should store your packet somewhere that has a pretty regular temperature that isn't gonna be too hot for it. Once again, a closet works really well. I'm going to use 2 seeds. You could use up to 4 just to increase your chances of getting something that germinates. And you can see the seed is bigger than the other seeds available, but still very small. This will maybe go 1/4 of an inch into the soil. I'll use my pinky, and you can use any sort of implement to make some small holes, and then just put them in like that. Cover it up gently, and then, of course, adding water. The only thing that a seed needs to germinate is the correct temperature, usually above like 65 degrees, and water. That's purely it. And so making sure that your seedling gets watered every day is the best thing that you can do for it. Let's see if the back of the seed packet tells me how long it will take to germinate. It says 7 to 10 days. So in a week, probably a little longer than that, is when I should start seeing my little seedling poking up. Given that, once again, we're in winter, our plant isn't in the most ideal growing conditions, you can expect your days to germination to be longer by like 1.5 times longer than what the seed packet says. So I'll wait a good 2 weeks to see if this is germinated, and if it hasn't by then, I'll try again. So in your kit, you'll have received a little container of vermicompost. This was taken from our worm system. It's all of the good, nutritious worm poop that is drained to the bottom of our system. This is that pure vermicompost scooped into a container and then very lightly given some water so that it's easier to pour and scoop. It has the instructions on the bottle, but here I have half a liter of water. So our conversion is 2 tablespoons per liter. So I'll go 1 tablespoon for this little container here. I'll just scoop that in, maybe stir it a little bit. And then I want to wait at least a day for this solution to be incorporated, for those nutrients that are water soluble to be soluble in the water and convert into nutrients that the plant is able to take. And you can keep this solution, use it about once a week or every other week. Since we're working with seedlings, which once again are sensitive little babies, over-fertilizing can bring issues with it. And so really try not to use this more than once a week when you're watering. Once you make the solution, it should stay usable, valuable for at least a month or 2 afterwards. So not too much concern in making too much. So when you've received your kit, you've received 1 to 2 or more herb seedlings. This is cilantro right here. As any sort of seedling comes up, it's first going to give you its false leaves, which are these symmetrical leaves that look quite completely different from our true leaf up here. When you're repotting, you can plant the plant to its false leaves. Burying all of this stem is going to make it more stabilized and yeah, really set it up for success. Sort of everything on this stem, once it is underground, it will be encouraged to turn into root, which is pretty cool. So you have your larger pot and some sort of saucer underneath it. You'll just start scooping your potting mix into this container. So working with our seedling that's going into its bigger container, something we'll need to look out for is that the roots are loose and available. We planted these seedlings about 2 weeks ago. They're just coming up, and so I'm not concerned about the root ball being entangled in itself, but I'll try to explain this as I go along. A technique that I've seen that feels extremely useful is taking your small cell and sort of making space for it in its new location, which is going to make it easier to incorporate having that large hole in it as we add it. So I have my space ready. I'm going to sort of massage the sides of this cell and encourage the plant to fall right out. So there are roots that do reach the end of the cell, which is an excellent development. If these roots were really tangled and gnarled up on each other, be very intentional in massaging the roots to make sure that we have bits that are hanging down. Once again, I'm not concerned about this for the seedlings that we've given you as part of your take-home kit, but also for the next time that you're repotting. If you were to repot this container, it would be the same process, just on a larger scale. Since my roots are loose, I'm gonna do my best to place my seedling into the hole given. And bury it even deeper, going up to that first set of false leaves, or at least just deeper than the way that it's come up here. I think that the legginess, which is to say how long the stem is due to a lack of exposure to light. We had our grow out tower set for 8 hours a day of light instead of 12. And so those are the factors that I'm putting together. So just tender, simple pats. Sort of a nice mindful moment to have with your little friend. With the soil added, we have just completely rehomed this small living creature. It's kind of freaking out right now. And the best way to help reincorporate it back into the world is to give it water. The way I've had this described to me that really worked was, everything is unknown to this little thing. It has no idea what's going on, but water, that it knows and recognizes and will help it sort of find its way home, encourage the roots to start spreading out into that bigger growing medium. Be ready. So let's say it's been a few months, your herb in your windowsill is looking beautiful and it's ready to harvest. With our herbs, since we're just growing those green leaves, they can really be harvested pretty frequently. There isn't a certain level of maturity or size of the leaf to start harvesting. It's really just getting the herbs when you want to get the herbs. In general, you only want to harvest 1/5 or 20% of your plant at the time. The best time to harvest your herb is going to be in mid-morning. Over the night, the plant is restoring itself and filling itself with energy, and that energy sort of trickles down throughout the day as it does its work of photosynthesizing and absorbing the light. And so your plant is going to have the most energy, be the most vigorous, be most likely to not wilt in that mid-morning, sort of like 9 a.m. through maybe 11 a.m. That being said, especially since we're growing inside, you can harvest your plant whenever you would like. When you're harvesting, make sure to use clean scissors that are sanitized. When we're cutting or harvesting the herb, we are creating an open wound. And so just being mindful that wound isn't going to get infected, being as gentle and safe as we can. The best place to harvest will be sort of at a branching node of your plant that comes off of the main stem. If your plants are overgrown, you could do a more intense harvest. You can take up to 2/3 of most herbs and they'll still be able to regenerate and restore themselves. Maybe most importantly is to harvest your herbs before they start putting up flowers. So the general life cycle of any sort of plant is growing that green growth and then eventually budding into a flower. And then making seed, shedding that seed, and then the plant will completely die. And so when your plant starts to make those flowers, it's getting toward the end of its life cycle, and you want to encourage it to stay in that green vegetative growth by cutting off flowers as soon as you see them, or harvesting the plant before it can get to that flowering stage. When a plant starts to flower, that can also affect the texture and the taste of it, which can be pretty plant specific or even palate specific in terms of how sensitive you can tell those different changes in flavor. So for best flavor, try to harvest plants before they flower and cut off flowers as soon as you see them coming up. A lot of herbs you can also dry if you're trying to save them for all season long, or if you just have too much for you to take fresh in that moment. Some herbs that I would recommend drying would be parsley, basil, and dill. What I have here is a dried bundle of herbs. This is sort of the end process. The way the drying can work best is cutting off a bundle of what you'd like to save, and then putting some sort of twine, or I really recommend a rubber band to keep that bundle together. I recommend a rubber band because as the herbs dry, they'll start to shrink, and if you have something like twine, it's possible that the bundle will get loose and fall to the floor. If you don't have stems, but rather just loose leaves, the best way to dry that would be on a tray of any sort, just having a single layer of leaves in front. This bundle was dried in my cubicle which is a great example of the sort of condition you're looking for, something that isn't receiving direct light, so not in a window, and has just a normal amount of ventilation. Some folks will talk about using a fan for ventilation. I've never had an issue drying things in my closet, in my back porch, or in my cubicle space. Generally, you'll want to dry things for about a week or so. You'll know that the plant is dry when it crumbles to the touch, just like that. When you have your dry bundle, you would take this over any sort of herb or bag and just slowly crush and crumble the bits to have, the herb that you're looking to save. So let's imagine we're already back to next May. The sun's coming out, it's getting warm again. You've been growing your rosemary or dill or thyme in a pot all winter long, and you're ready to see it really thrive outside for the next summer growing season. That's definitely a possibility, and a lot of herbs will start doing a lot better once they're outside, and so an exciting transformation to see. If you're considering bringing your herbs outside for the season, that can be a really excellent time to repot them, just giving them sort of a new start for their life. The most important thing to consider if you're bringing your plants outside is they'll need a period of hardening. Your plant is used to being inside, not dealing with any outdoor elements, being in a very regulated temperature, environment, and watering schedule, and the outside world is a lot scarier and different from that. Hardening should be done over a week or two, and it just looks like bringing your plant outside for a little bit and then a little bit more every day. It's nice to start with an hour or two, and then after a week, that goes up to, a full 8 hours, a full 12, up to 24 hours just living outside. That'll allow your plant to be exposed to the elements like wind and rain and just nightly temperature changes in an easy, navigable sort of transition. Something to note is that some perennial herbs, perennial being plants that will come back every season versus a plant like an annual that will grow and die and be done in a year. Some perennial herbs need a dormancy phase. They need to be in frozen ground to be able to really come back strong the next summer season. Chives, for example, are going to have a hard time being repotted and brought out for the season. This is just a note to say you should check either the seed packet of what you're growing or do a quick Google search to see if it is a type of herb that can be brought outside for the spring or that can be successful without a dormancy period.